I hope the last video helped you understand what is interpersonal communication, why it is important, and how do you improve on your interpersonal communication. This video, however, is going to be all about conversations. We are going to be looking at conversations and connections. In conversations, we are going to be starting off by talking about the basic conversation process, and then how to have deep conversations, and then finally certain aspects of how do you use conversations to create good connections. So let's get started with the first thing that we are going to learn, which is the basic conversation process. Now, whenever you communicate, there is a standard thing in place. If you look back to all the conversations that you've had, there is a standard process. You start the conversation and the conversation builds over time. It could be a short one, it could be a long one, and then finally you wrap the conversation up and then move on with your work or whatever it is that you have to do next. So the three main aspects of conversations are starting the conversation, building the conversation, and closing the conversation. It's not too complicated, but this is where a lot of us struggle. How do I start a conversation? What am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to do? And then how do I keep the conversation going? I don't know what to say beyond a point. I get stuck often, and then I always feel like I did not leave the conversation on a right note. So for all these kind of questions or statements or thoughts that are running in your mind, this is the core piece. Now, if you feel that you're already good at conversations or doing this basic piece, I would still suggest you watch through this, because you will learn a lot of nice new ways that you can incorporate in your existing conversations and take them to a whole new level. Let's start by talking about how do you start conversations. Here's a simple question. In English, there are basically 4 types of statements. Do you remember what those are? Obviously, I'm going to put them up in a few seconds, but do you remember the 4 basic types of sentences that you can write in English? Now, if you remember, there's a basic declarative statement, there is a question statement, there is a request kind of a statement, and then there is an exclamation kind of statement. And that's exactly the 4 ways in which you can start a conversation as well. There is absolutely no new way of doing this. These are the 4 basic ways in which you can start conversations as well. You can start by making a statement, or you can ask a question. You can be surprised or excited about something, or you could request something, and that's exactly how you start a conversation. You can compliment or wish somebody based on whatever it is they're doing. Maybe that's a great dress that you're wearing. I love how that color looks on you. Now that is an exclamatory statement. Hey, all the best with whatever you're doing currently. All the best on your current project. Now that is a wish. Now that becomes an exclamatory statement. You could ask a question, and that question could be related to anything. Maybe they're doing something, or they are showing you something, or they are working on something, and you can always ask them a question about it. You can make an observation which becomes a basic statement, and this observation can be practically about anything under the sun, even about the sun. So you can make an observation, or if they have asked something, then you can always give an answer, which can also be a statement, or in return a statement plus a question. You can also share something that you feel like sharing, or you could request for some help for something, and so on and so forth. So these are the basic ways in which you would start a conversation. Now that you've started a conversation, or maybe someone has started the conversation with you, how do you now build on to that conversation? Let's say you have started a conversation, then you're going to have to wait for the other person to respond. Or if someone else has initiated a conversation with you, then you have to respond. And this is the basic way you build a conversation. A couple of more extra tips I would like to share. Before you ask the next question, first one is what we just discussed, and then you can acknowledge what the other person has said and build on top of that by adding your own opinion, your ideas, etc., and so on and so forth. Also, another way that you can do this is, instead of becoming interrogative and start asking question after question, you could add some information first and then ask your question. This way, there is something for the other person to build on, which is what is called as conversation threading, which is the next thing I'm going to explain. Conversation threading is a beautiful process of how you can take things that the person has already shared and then keep building the conversation. And this way, you will never have to bother about how do I keep this conversation going. This is definitely something that is going to come of use to you. So let's see what exactly conversation threading is. Now, usually what happens, most of us often say, fine, I'm good, I'm okay, things are great. Generally, people don't tend to share. But let's say you've had this conversation, this person is someone you know. So let's say this person shares a little bit more about themselves. Now, as you can see, this is not something out of the world, but there are some aspects of this that you can then build on. For example, look at all the topics that this person has spoken about. They're talking about work, being occupied with work, they're talking about time, and then they're talking about themselves. So these are three great topics that you can choose to pick. Now, this is what is conversation threading. Now, you can talk about any one of these things that they have started to keep building the conversation instead of saying, oh, that's bad, right? So how do you keep this conversation going? So I can either talk about, that must be hectic. What's going on at work? So you build a conversation about work, which then the other person would respond to. And then you keep the conversation going. Or you can talk about the break and having time for themselves. And this is how conversation threading works. Look for those points where this person has shared something with you. And from there, you keep building. Now, I will stop here and say that it is going to be difficult if you're thinking about what should I say next? What should I ask next? Instead of listening to the person and paying attention. So remember, be interested, be present, and listen. 3 important things. Now, there are some more ways to build conversations, and here are 5 other ways. So let's take them one by one. Opinion. I can share an opinion about something that I feel. I feel that nowadays with work from home, people are just downloading a lot of work and there's no boundaries. Now, this becomes an opinion that I can share, which would help keep the conversation going. The next one is a random statement. It might not work well in all kinds of conversations, but something random like, do you know that this company has decided to do this kind of a policy going forward? Now, that is a random statement in the beginning of this, and this could also spur the conversation, but be careful where you do this. A cold read. I think you're the kind of person who does not take a lot of breaks. Now, this is a cold read, and it may or may not, but it will definitely make the other person curious. They will either say, yes, I am like that, or they'll be like, I'm not, but what makes you feel? And this would keep the conversation going. You could always share a story about something that happened with you, or an example of something that happened with you, or you could take it down the humorous road and say, I know, right? Work never ends. There are a lot of different ways to build a conversation, but always remember when you respond, ensure that you're giving the other person also enough things for them to build the conversation on and not give one-line answers. This is the way you can ensure that your conversations keep going and you wouldn't feel like, oh my God, what do I say next? So we've learned how to start the conversation and then how to build the conversation and keep it going. But at some point, the conversation has to end. So one of the things that we can look at is when a conversation ends, there are 3 ways it could go. Either it could end neutrally, or it could end with a positive impact, or it can end with a negative impact. Now, obviously, it is not possible for us to always try to go for a really positive impact. But what we can do is try to avoid a negative impact at the end of the conversation. So learning to close the conversation well would make a huge difference, because it is not just how you start, but it is also how you end. And that is what people usually tend to remember. So let's see how you can close conversations in different situations. So let's say you are at work and you need to close a conversation, whether it could be on chat or whether it could be on a face-to-face conversation. So you could do a quick summary of the things that you discussed, because it's a work-related situation. Or you can create a quick plan of action and say that, so these are the next steps that we're going to do. Or you could tell them what is the takeaway that you had by having this great conversation from this person, that I loved learning this from you. Or set up a next meeting if that is what is required. Or you could always ask the other person if they need help at any point, that they should not hesitate to reach out to you. Now, these are wonderful ways in which you can close work-related conversations. So now let's talk about casual conversations. So let's say you met someone outside at a party, at an event, etc. So you can always close a conversation by telling them how you could connect online and keep this friendship going. Or you could plan up for another meet with them, but hopefully one that you will definitely keep. You could always wish them well, and that is also a great way to finish it. You could also tell them the biggest takeaway that you had from that conversation, or you could share the impact that they created with you. Now, these are beautiful ways in which you can close a conversation. If you tell them, this is something I really enjoyed because I learned this from you. Now, imagine this person leaving on that kind of a high after your conversation. You would have created impact as well. Now, if these are networking events, then these are other ways you can close. You can then introduce them to others or get introduced to others as well. And this is a great way to keep conversations going and make new connections. You can invite them for a catch up, exchange contacts to maybe connect online, offline, etc. And you can also wish them well. Wishing well is a basic way to close a conversation. Don't end everything with just a smiley or a nod or thank you, I have to leave, oh, I'm getting late. Try to not end something with a negative impact. Always try for a neutral, if not positive. And with that, we are done with the conversation process. It's a simple thing, starting, building, and ending, but we seem to break our head a lot over it. Now, I know it's not as easy as it seems because there's a lot of effort that we need to take as well. But trust me, with time, with a little bit of effort, you will definitely get there and you will start having good, maybe great conversations. And these are the ways in which you can do that. Talking about good conversations, the next video is all about deep conversations, and you don't want to miss that. So I'll see you in the next video.